Eran is the mobile evangelist at Perfecto Mobile, or Perforce, as they are right now. He's quite old. He has been testing for over 20 years. Kidding. And for me, whenever I see a presentation by Eran, he's one of the authorities on mobile, IoT, web testing, and everything around it. I really, really enjoy listening to him. And he's also a published author, not of one book, but by two, Digital Quality Handbook and Continuous Testing for DevOps Professionals. And again, I always enjoy listening to him. So Eran, I'm gonna free the floor for you, and let's get on with it, man. Good luck.
Thank you. Do you want me to also share the video? It's not required.
No, it's not required. We will go with the presentation.
Awesome. So thank you, Yoel, and thank you guys online. And I will also follow up with all of you on Slack after the session. As mentioned, the session is about stabilizing your continuous testing in DevOps continuously. And I will emphasize the continuously because like, you know, anything about testing, you test it for one version and it works fine. But then when you're not testing the second software version, you have surprises. Same goes for testing, and it requires maintenance. And as we are in the DevOps reality, the aha moment is no longer you know, relevant. We need to have a very solid process of continuously maintaining our test scripts, test automation scripts, to A, make them continuously valuable, and B, that they're not blocking any feedback that you might need to make smart decisions about quality, about your product. Before we get started, and thank you, Yoel, you actually saved a lot of my time on this slide because you said everything correctly. I will just emphasize the old. Yeah, I'm almost 20 years in this domain. I feel a bit old, but I enjoy every moment of it. The only thing that I would add about my introduction is if you're not already following me, you can still, you know, follow me on Twitter. I publish a lot of blogs, sometimes on a weekly basis. At least once a month, I'm trying to publish new content around software testing for mobile, for web. The previous one was about, you know, we are just wrapping up a decade of software development and testing and getting ready for the next decade. And, you know, Raj, going forward these days, is going to talk to you about AI. We see AI in testing a lot. So it's quite exciting. I have my own personal blog outside of Perfecto by Perforce, which is continuoustesting.blog. You can also subscribe and get notified on new blogs on this site as well. So let's get started. I'm going to talk to you outside of the snow about the current state of the market and how it relates to the Agile Testing Manifesto that most of you are familiar with. I'm going to double click on certifying test automation and what to actually certify when you decide about your test automation scoping and coverage, as well as aging. If time permits, I will try to do a live demo. I hope I will have time. If not, I can follow up with anyone that wants to see, you know, a nice, cool, open source BDD framework in action, testing across both mobile and web. I'll be happy to do it also offline if time does not permit. So let's do a short, you know, landscape awareness, if you like, about where the market is today. So while we are all talking about continuous testing and DevOps and you know, all the digital transformation, let's just zoom in about for a minute about a few things that we are seeing. So obviously Android 10 is out there for a while, but I think the big story is iOS 13. I think Apple is trying to break a new record with, I think, 8 or 9 already patch releases of iOS 13 since the launch in mid-September. And this is a huge disruption in addition to the split between iOS and iPadOS. So if you online are doing mobile application testing or even just responsive web, which has also a touch on mobile devices, obviously you want to keep up with all the latest and greatest news from Apple. 5G is being deployed all over the world, but the coverage of 5G, actually the spread of the new hardware, the new antennas, is not as expected. So we are going to see, we're actually starting to see some degradation and user experience that varies across the globe, coming from 5G to 4G LTE. These are two different protocols, two different hardware, aiming to two different user experiences. So these are all also impacting our overall quality and the end user experience. Smartphones are reinventing themselves with the new foldable devices from Samsung, Huawei, and Motorola. We assume that iOS is going to be, with Apple, going to launch a foldable iPhone sometimes next year. Edge Insider, which is a Chrome-based browser, was just released as public beta. Also, a minor disruption, if you like, to your web testing. So why I'm showing you that? I'm showing you that because even if you didn't do anything for the past quarter around your mobile or web application, which I doubt it's true, but let's assume it is, all of these things requires you to continuously do functional and user experience, non-functional testing, if you like, across these platforms. Just because, you know, the market is not slowing down and has serious implications on your you know, digital applications. In addition, and I won't steal the thunder from Raj, we are also seeing, from a landscape perspective, a growing trend, and I would say we are in zone 3, if you like, in the maturity of machine learning based test automation or test creation. And I assume as we are marching towards 2020, we are going to see, as part of the test automation, more codeless-based testing plus RPA. We have seen players like Tricentis launching their RPA tools, and we know that the Selenium IDE that we just seen as a free open source tool also has some machine learning for object locator strategy out there. So I'm showing you that, following the previous slide, just to let you know that, okay, we see a lot of disruptions in the digital landscape from things that we cannot control. This is something that we see as a trend that we can control. And if you're not really looking today at AI or machine learning algorithm in the different domains of software testing, I think this is the time to start exploring, look at what currently blocks you from a test automation creation or execution or analysis, either of these, and see what best fits you to solve your problems, and maybe machine learning AI or AI are the answer for that. With that, let's jump to the Agile Testing Manifesto. And for those of you who follow me, I tend to read only the bold marked words in the Agile Testing Manifesto. And if you read them, only the bold words here, you are going to get this sentence: continuous testing of all testing activities that gives value across the team to get high product coverage. Okay, I ignore the other words, I only focus on that. And why is this important, and how does it relate to my session? We are required today to implement test automation. This is not new. Because we are in a DevOps reality, we need to continuously test a few times a day, few times per week across teams. The only thing that I do not see as a practice, and I meet perfecto customers and practitioners almost every week, and I hear the same thing. While testing is not new and software testing isn't new, and everyone knows the importance of testing and the importance of test automation, if you read this sentence and try to apply it in a reality in each and every organization, whether it's small or large, what you will see is that, yeah, we are implementing test automation, we are bundling it or scheduling it as part of our CI through Jenkins or other schedulers. But when you start drilling down into these sentences, you hear, yeah, actually, we are not really covering all the testing activities. What do you mean by that? Yeah, we are not able to incorporate security testing, accessibility. Sometimes we are not able to put performance testing. In some cases, we actually are still carrying a gap from previous user stories because we didn't have the time to automate things. Oh, by the way, we are not also monitoring all the previous reports because you don't have the time. So we are not really seeing or foreseeing the value upon which we invest in testing. So I ask them, do you know which of the test scenarios that you execute day in and day out actually gives you value? In most cases, they will say, maybe in most cases, they will actually say, actually, no, we lost track of what actually gives us value versus what, we just execute because it's working, it passes, it's part of the CI. We don't want to, touch it. We don't want to move it to not break a build or something like that. And then I double click on the following sentence. Okay, who is doing testing in your organization? And then I say, yeah, we have some business testers that are doing manual testing. Developers, opportunistically are doing some unit testing. And this is the old story. Nothing changes. I'm talking to you about facts from 2019. Okay, so most of the burden or the headache on test automation still falls on the software test automation engineers, the SDETs, the ones that know how to code in Java or JavaScript, the Selenium and Appium gurus. And the developers, the business testers, are kind of left outside of the testing that makes value or gives value to the entire team. And obviously, this impacts the overall goal of identifying business risks through getting high product coverage. So my message here from this slide is, A, look at what you have right now within your team. See the structure, whether you are divided into squads or other feature teams, and see whether you have the right skill set, you have the right process in place to empower all of the practitioners to take part in software test creation and execution. See that you're not missing any important test activity. Security, accessibility is a must today, and no one actually pays attention. In some organizations, it's being outsourced as a, it's a mandatory thing for us, so it's not part of the CI. We are outsourcing it, and sometimes we are getting, the report in time for the release. Sometimes we are getting it outside of the cycle. This is not the right way to do continuous testing, especially in a DevOps reality. You want to be done before you release to production, and done means everything is done. I decided to add this visual as a continuous slide for the previous one, just because it's fresh and new. One of my colleagues from Tricentis, Wolfgang Platz, released last week, if I'm not mistaken, a new book called Enterprise Continuous Testing. Wolfgang, as a CTO for Tricentis, actually collaborated with me also on my continuous testing for DevOps professionals book last year. So I wanted to give a shout out to him for the new book and congratulate him, but also show you a nice visual that was taken from the book. I got permission. So the continuous testing reasoning by Wolfgang Platz, going back to my previous slides, and the digital transformation shows the trend that happened over the past, I wouldn't say decade, but at least over the past 5 years, that the cadence of releases just became more challenging from years to months to weeks to hours, every hours. That's the continuous deployment kind of profession. But on the other hand, we have seen that the technical complexity and the rate of change only increased. And you have seen my slide about the 5G and the foldables and the iOS releases and IoT and other stuff that are surrounding us, smart homes and voice chats and bots, whatever. All of these just adds more layers of complexity to our daily testing and planning. But the delivery cycle time reduced, and this is where you see the hype here. This is where you see the continuous testing that became so fundamental, so critical today for organizations to be able to release in a matter of hours a software that brings value to their users, and B, with high quality that matches the technical complexities that are out there. Only through continuous testing, assessing the risks, identifying the value that tests are bringing you, you can actually assess it. In the next couple of slides, I'm actually going to give you some practical tips that I I use and I advise to my clients on how to keep up with all of this, because in theory it's nice, but in reality, obviously, it's much more complicated. So I also want to talk to you just a moment about DRE. DRE is, again, probably not a new term for you, but the importance of this metric, if you are measuring success in continuous testing, you need to have some kind of your own DRE metrics to measure the shift left successfulness of your teams. And what do I mean by that? If you're able to get identification rate of defects, early in the cycle, in the development phase, if some would say within the build process, you are in a good phase. If you are obviously slipping defects to production, you have slip defects to production, this is where something is quite wrong. And in my experience, these in the red box letters or the statements here, these are the root causes that I see making the balance between the defects that are removed during the development phase versus the ones that are detected later in the cycle in an opposite rate. We all obviously want to have as less defects detected later in the cycle as possible, but coverage, obviously, test coverage is one of the key pieces that does not allow this metric to be positive, in the shift left statement. Lack of and late of test automation testing, obviously, is the #1 in my mind reason for the defects slipping to production. Because if you're not able to automate enough high valuable test cases and you are doing them manually means that you do not, in most cases today, when you want to release in a matter of hours or days, teams and business decision makers don't have the time to wait for the manual testing cycle that takes so long to end. So the manual testers are not really being counted, and sometimes they are finding key issues, but they're finding them outside of the cycle. No one listens. Okay, so late test automation development and testing is a key to this root cause, or the outcome that we see here. The ability or lack of ability for testing, designing for testability, is another reason that we see. Some areas are simply blocked for developers, by developers in my mind, for testers to automate, and these black holes are simply hiding a lot of bugs. Lack of unit testing is another thing that's a common thing, but also something that I see rising a lot is the outdated test environments or platforms under test. When you're testing on outdated environments or outdated, let's say, iOS or Edge browsers or Chrome browsers, you're really wasting your time. Okay, you're not really testing about on what's going to be in production, and you're missing the value here. And we see a lot of environments that are automated pretty well, by the way, through CI, but no one cares to look at the environments and make sure that they have all the latest data, they have all the latest platform configurations, and therefore when they give you the results, whether they're positive or negative, they mean nothing because they weren't executed against the right platforms. To make it more, I would say, scientific, within Perfecto, we have conducted across all of our clouds some research to understand the root cause of test automation failures. What's keeping the test automation engineering behind and blocking them from delivering high value? And what we have learned is that there are 4 main issues that prevent test automation from being high valuable continuously. And obviously, the 40% of the root causes are in the scripts themselves and in the frameworks that people are using to automate their test scenarios. And when I'm talking about scripts, I'm looking at object locators that aren't stable enough, causing flakiness, coding skills. Obviously, this is the fundamental of writing proper test scenario. Okay, it means you are bringing your platform to a ready state mode. You are handling pop-ups. You are handling disconnections. You have all the right prerequisites to start the testing from the beginning. Otherwise, when you're not keeping this in mind, or you're not maintaining the code properly like you would maintain your production code, obviously you get the results of script issues, and these are not issues. This is a waste. This slide shows a huge time waste, resource waste, and money obviously waste from the entire DevOps team, rather than focusing on innovation, rather than focusing on new test automation infrastructure, maybe adopting machine learning or other advanced technologies. But no, when you have this slide in front of you as an executive, this shows you that you are wasting time, resources, money, rather than getting value from your testing. Other reasons, we have the backend issues, the data or the outdated environment, the availability of the backend services, the network itself. We also see lab issues, devices that are locked, configuration of the devices or the browsers, the stability of the lab that you have, whether it's in the cloud or on-premise, it doesn't matter. Lab needs to be stable at all times. Otherwise, it doesn't matter if your tests are of high value or not. They won't have the platform to run against. And we also have the orchestration issues. And this is an important item to cover, because when we are looking at feature teams, squads, DevOps, okay, you're looking at many teams integrating into one specific, product at the end of the day. And this is when you want to have a proper synchronization, a proper alignment between the platform under test, whether they are web, mobile, desktop, doesn't matter. You want to have sufficient licenses. You want to have proper visibility and governance across this platform, that when you schedule an execution through your CI servers, doesn't matter which team, you do not block one another. You have a fully aligned environment. To address this slide or this reality, in my mind, this is a reality. You can play a bit with the percentages, but I hope that I'm not really missing a fifth box here, because I think this is quite enough. You as a test manager, or also a developer manager, in some cases the CIO itself, needs to be on top of the 4 questions at any given time, because we don't care if last week everything worked fine on your lab, if this week everything crashes, right? So you need to be on top of things and need to be able to address the following question: what's wrong with my scripts after each execution? If you can do the maintenance part before the execution, even better. What's wrong with my backend services? What's wrong with my lab? And what's wrong with my executions? If I'm able to visualize all of these questions and get the state of the universe for my testing artifacts across teams, this is the first step that I can take to be continuous testing in DevOps ready. Before that, I'm kind of playing a risky game here. It's a game of luck, and it's not something that I'm controlling, and that's a huge risk that we are taking, and eventually it costs you money. So keep that in mind and see how, from reporting perspective and analytics, you are able to be on top of these 4 pillars. If you got one of them right and it's fine, focus on the others, but you need to be on top of these things. I won't focus on each and every word in this slide. Again, this is just about noise reductions, tying back to the previous slide. If you have a regression suite of 10,000 test cases, we see as an average 20% of these test cases will be a failure. But out of these 2,000 test failures, on an average, we see, because we have this, scientific Sogeti labs, but also your experience can probably match this reality. Only 20 will probably be actual bugs. The remaining number of failures are either false negative, some kind of noise related to the environment, to the scripts, to the code, to the lab, whatever. Look at the percentage here, and this what's actually this should guide you from a testing value perspective on getting the right answers from the previous slide. We are not finding dramatic and serious bugs in regression. We are finding a few, but out of 10,000 test cases, we are not going to find 5,000 bugs, okay? We're going to find a very low amount of defects. And when you see, and I've seen too many dashboards in the past 2 decades, as Yoel mentioned earlier, that shows, annoying amount of failures. Out of 10K of test scenarios, having 2,000 failures seems to me unrealistic. It's a waste. It's poor practices. And at the end of the day, you are losing trust here with your developers and maybe with your own activities or your frameworks. And at the end of the day, you're going to blame the tools, not yourself, because no one wants to blame itself. But at the end of the day, it's on you to make sure that you are certifying your test automation, you are keeping track on what brings you value, you are eliminating, obsoleting test cases that stops bringing you value just to be successful. So how do you certify test automation? Again, think continuous value. What was valuable today might not be valuable next week or in 3 software iterations. Think about the maintenance of the test before you rush into writing the first line of code or record it if you're using AI or other tools, okay? Think about the ROI that the tool actually will bring you. And if you have seen one of my previous sessions, I think I've done one last month. I think it was at DevOps East in Orlando, and I actually eliminated the word ROI and swapped it with value. I think that when we are switching to a new decade, this is the right time to also throw away outdated terms. And I think for test automation today, especially in the era of continuous testing, ROI doesn't mean anything anymore, okay? It's all about value. And value means I'm able to identify business risk quite fast. I'm able to help the business, help the developers certify product features as fast as possible without adding flakiness to the game, to the CI, and so forth. If a test case that I'm automating is not able to detect over time any defect, it only passes, or it's not passing across multiple platforms with consistent results, and the execution time of it is less than 5 minutes, this is a red flag that the test might not, be in the value bucket, and you want to rethink it, especially not put it in the CI, okay? The CI needs to be the highestly valuable test suite that you can think of. If a test is too lengthy, it doesn't provide consistent results, it didn't detect defects over 2 or 3 or 4 iterations, while it's a regression test, I understand. Think if either you have a way of refining it, playing with it a bit, but if it's just running for the sake of running, maybe it's just wasting your time, resources, and eventually when it will fail just because of flakiness and low maintenance, because no one cared about it, that's when you're going to start losing even more. And this is a continuous process. What I'm showing you right now, you want to do every 2 or 3 software iterations, because things change, the market changes, and your product changes. This is not new, but at the end of the day, when I go and speak with practitioners, I see, enormous test suite of 10,000, 15,000 test cases, and I ask these guys, listen, are you sure that you need 15,000 test cases for a web application, and this needs to be run every week? It makes no sense. And then when you start drilling into the success rate of the test cases and the ability to identify value or defects, you start to see that maybe it's not that necessary to have such huge test cases that no one is maintaining and they are just consuming resources. So measuring test automation, not ROI, value, can start with these following metrics, okay? I would encourage all of you online and the ones that are going to show to see the recording, go to your regression suite. Start with the biggest suite that you have right now in your pipeline and start measuring. You don't need to go each and every bullet. Select 1 or 2. If you don't have it in an automated fashion, ask some of the practitioners, in the nearest regression cycle to keep an eye and report back some of these metrics, okay? What is the cycle time per iteration? What test automation types am I executing? Can I get this DRE, error detection efficiency, within the CI? This kind of metrics across the teams and in the execution pipeline can give you, some idea of where you are today, and maybe give you, again, it's not a finger pointing at anyone, it's just continuous improvement towards getting a very well optimized machine for testing your product. That's all. So look at some of these metrics after the session, see what you can learn from your existing regression suite that has been running for I don't know how many times now, and see how you can actually improve. And by the way, consider involving the 3 personas that I'm about to touch pretty soon. So after spending so much time in the market and speaking with many customers from the enterprises and the SMBs across different verticals, financial and telcos and media and retail, I've learned that 3 personas are actually doing testing for us today. The majority of the testing actually falls on the developers and the SDETs, but there are a bunch of important test suites that are manual, which includes exploratory testing, user experience testing, that are owned by the business testers. Okay, but unfortunately, when you are shifting to an hourly-based release cycle, these business testers, unfortunately, are not part of the game. They are not supporting the test automation. They are not giving value within the CI, within the sprint. They are always late in their feedback because they don't have time. So this is the time, as we close the decade, to involve them, going back to the Agile Testing Manifesto, testing across the team, right? These guys deserve a chance to join the automation pipeline through things like the Selenium IDE, BDD frameworks. Perfecto launched quite recently a codeless Selenium web-based solutions that you record and playback. We have other players that also are starting to rise, like Mabel, which is sponsoring this event, that can help these business testers take part, automate all of their manual tedious testing, and maybe plug them into the CI and deliver good value. Once you do that, and this is a snapshot, and I hope you can see, you don't need to read every letter, but the important thing about this slide, and it was taken from one of our largest customers, I'm not mentioning the name here, you can see that over 2 months, I'm telling you here, this is 2 months of executions, this customer executed over 1.3 million test cases. He has experienced, again, with such a large executions, he has experienced 29.3K failures, okay? Not all of these were bugs, okay? Before touching on the bugs, what I want to show you is that what you can see here, the automation framework that this customer was using to create the 1.3 million test executions were different, okay? Espresso, codeless, Selenium, XCUI test, some interactive testing, okay? And if you scroll down, you will see Selenium with Protractor and many other frameworks. What I'm saying here, this customer actually enjoys the benefit of the multi-persona contributing to test automation. He's leveraging the developers that are using XCUI test and Espresso, right here, XCUI test and Espresso to run on Android and iOS devices. He's using business testers to automate the website through the codeless Selenium. And he's using some SDETs to run Selenium Java-based test cases. But it's still not perfect because we are still seeing some percentage of failures here. And if you can read, it's a bit blurry on the screen. Here it's a pop-up handling problem that caused the failure. Here it's an element not found. And there are other root causes that are actually contributing to the failure rates. With Perfecto, we actually built a machine learning algorithm on top of the report that can actually look at the logs and understand what was the root cause that causes the failure. Was it a pop-up? Was it an element that wasn't found, like an XPath or other flaky locator, or a device that was blocked or in use and stuff like that? This helps filter out the noise and getting a much better idea about your quality within the pipeline. So again, you don't need to have, if you're using Perfecto, you got it. If you don't use Perfecto, this is the kind of things that you want to look at as a test manager or as an executive. You want to see the entire testing artifacts that are coming from each practitioner in real time, over time, with the root causes. Not to blame this guy that couldn't handle properly the pop-up, but to know, okay, I'm not seeing it, we don't have an issue with Android. It was just a poor test case that needs to be fixed. And up until then, let's exclude it from the cycle so we don't get redundant noise. So this is like a live example of how one would implement the previous methodology that I've just talked about. It also goes to the way teams are selecting, and you have seen in the previous example that this customer actually selected a mix of things, a mix of frameworks like Espresso and Selenium and XUI test and Codeless, and some are done manually as well. And I think that it is also using some BDD Cucumber testing as well. Why am I saying that in light of this slide? I'm saying because you need to keep in mind when you are, and teams are changing their tool stack every year or every 2 years. And the changes are good. I'm not saying that changing is bad. Changes are good because the market is constantly changing. I've shown you in the previous slides, the 5G, the foldables, the requirements from us as test engineers are constantly changing. And when they're changing, they require some changes also to the technology that enables us to be successful in test automation. So when you are going through your tool stack and considering changing some open source frameworks or other test automation solution, or a vendor if you have, look at the following considerations. Look at the community behind the open source framework, the maturity of the solution. Look if it can fit your SDLC process. If you're using BDD, does it support BDD? If it supports all the other environmental plugins that I have, can it plug into Jenkins? Or if I'm using Bamboo or TeamCity or other CI server, can it work nicely with this CI server? What's the level of the reporting? I've shown you a nice dashboard from Perfecto. Can it give you the right feedback from your test automation creation? Okay, can it cover all the scenarios that I need? Okay, if I want to mimic an environment, if I want to automate voice or a chatbot within my application, can the test framework support that? Okay, or inject an image into my device, things like that. Can it scale the automation? How robust are the artifacts coming from the automation? Does it have the self-healing algorithms, or does it have the support for a page object model or other best practices behind that, and so on? By the way, we are seeing today in the regards of automation robustness, a growing trend with headless browsers like Puppeteer from Google that provides quite a robust output or outcome from a test perspective. We see Cypress.io that also bundles within the execution a browser, so you have a much stable environment with faster execution time without the need to build your own Selenium grid. There are different coverage-related concerns around Cypress, but it's a give and take here, and this is the balance. What I've learned, and that's my bottom line for this slide, is that in today's reality, when you want to implement the Agile Testing Manifesto that requires you to test across the teams, and then you want to acknowledge the skill set, there is no one single framework that can cover everything for everyone. You need to have a mix of technologies, some which are codeless, some which are code-based, some that feature unit testing, some that are non-functional by nature, to be successful, to have the proper coverage of all testing activities. Again, going back to the manifesto, without that, you are going to simply struggle and force practitioners that are not feeling comfortable with the technology to be successful in it. So think about the mixing and matching. That will be my guidance upon this slide. If I didn't need to, raise my case, you can see it here. That was taken from NPM Trends last month, and it shows you the different variants and popularity of open source frameworks over time. And I mentioned earlier Puppeteer and Cypress. You can see how Puppeteer as a headless browser overpassed Protractor, and Cypress here actually is growing its popularity through downloads and contributions to Git, to the open source repositories. So the importance about this slide, and if you're not following NPM trends or using this, it's a very good resource to look at especially in times when you are looking to change a framework or you are challenged by existing frameworks, look at what's happening in the market, see who is the hottest open source library out there and adopt it. It might save you a lot of pain. So this is how the web landscape looks today.
Eran, 5-minute warning.
I know, I'm looking at my watch. I will skip this slide because it's a double click on the previous one, but showing you again the mixing and matching based on what you can actually get from each library or framework, whether it's Selenium or different. Again, this is in the scope of web. I would probably close to finishing my my session with this slide, and I think this is an important exercise that I did. I wanted to convince myself a few weeks ago that I'm not just talking nonsense. And when you have seen my slide about the 3 different practitioners, the business tester, the SDET, and the developers working together, or that they need to work together. If I needed proof for that methodology of mine, I looked at few frameworks. I looked at Selenium and Appium. I looked at XUI-Test and Espresso or headless browsers. I look at codeless, can be Selenium codeless, can be the Perfecto codeless or other codeless like Mabel. And I looked at BDD. And what you can see here based on skill set, coverage requirements, integrations, maturity, etc., you see here the proper matching of a persona to these technologies. You see that the SDET will probably feel more comfortable in the Selenium Appium environment, while the developers will like Cypress or headless browser or Espresso and XUI-Test because they live in the IDEs. They're very accessible to the developers. Codeless will be a perfect match to the business testers. And look at that, BDD, no surprise, require a mix and a collaboration between business testers and the SDETs or the developers to give them the custom functions in Java or JavaScript so they can build their Gherkin scenarios. So this is not new. BDD wasn't invented today, but it was already foreseeing what I'm talking about testing across all the different team members, personas. And the reality actually shows that you want mix of technologies across mix of personas with different skill sets working together. With that, I would like to jump to one final slide because the time does not allow me to talk longer. This is my final slide with one last word about the 4 key pillars of continuous testing in DevOps. I've shown you over the past 45 minutes some flakiness, some considerations of certifying test automation to be successful in DevOps. You need to have a good grip on your test creation activities that matches the right personas, as mentioned in the previous slide. You want to have proper execution in a very robust lab, whether it's in-house or in the cloud, it doesn't matter, but you need to have full control over it, and it needs to be reliable and robust. And most important, you want to have proper feedback and analysis out of all of this. And why is that important? Because of that. Look at the previous slide. I just broke it into 2 segments. On the left, in the creation activities, execution, and the lab, this is where the CIOs of the world, the enterprises, the organizations are spending most of their money to create test automation with tools, personas, and everything. But this is a blind spot for them. The only way to see the value the testing is giving you is through the analysis. This is where you get the fast feedback. This is where you get the root cause analysis. This is where you can improve on your quality because you have the visibility. You are running most of the testing on the left within the CI. When you're running it within the CI, you are blind. The only thing that shows you what you're actually getting from the testing, again, the value is through the analysis. You need to invest more, especially going forward with machine learning and other algorithms, like I've shown you with Perfecto, in analysis, so you get full control over your testing assets. With that, Yoel, I'll bring it to you exactly on time for Q&A.
If you actually want to talk about specifics, you're 5 minutes late, but I like you, man, so I'm not going to do it too much. First of all, it's great. I always love hearing you, man. You have a way of basically explaining the simple facts that are usually missed in all the discussion. And in this case, I think that the fact that we need to think more about removing and in addition to adding, meaning all of us, how can we add more and more and more tests? How now you're saying, hey, start removing them. That's a brilliant point. But a question here that was asked on the Slack channel, there will be more questions in there. How can we convince management? Meaning it's an idea that it's as simple as it sounds for many people, it's counterintuitive. How other than showing them, yes, the percentage of time, have you seen any like best ways of approaching them, especially if you don't want to start investing a lot of time on measurements at the beginning?
Sure. I think, it comes, obviously the management, and, when you are implementing DevOps today, I want to look at management as part of the game, okay? It's no longer, this siloed approach, which you throw things over and you have management which is blind. Today, in many organizations which are doing continuous testing and are implementing Agile, the management should be, and in most cases is involved in the entire workflows. But management without data is blind, and it cannot make data-driven smart decisions. So to convince management, you need, again, you don't need to invest that much in measurements, but you cannot be as stupid, right? You are going to come to your management. I'm taking the previous slide as an example, and you will tell him, listen, I'm using Selenium, I implemented X amount of test cases, I executed them, and so what? When you go to the management and you tell them, okay, this is the value that I got over the past 3 regression cycles from executing 1,000 test cases in Selenium for this feature team, okay? Okay, the management will like you much better because, okay, you're giving him data which is indisputable. You cannot argue with data. You give him facts. And B, you're also giving yourself weapons to ask for more focused requirements because you're going to point to him. Listen, Mr. Manager, in the 1,000 test cases that I've executed, I've seen 1, 2, 3, 4. What have I seen? I've seen flakiness. I've seen lab that is outdated. I've seen environment that is not stable enough. And this translates to some best practices or other requirements that you can implement and be more successful. And the management cannot argue with that. So you need to merge both data and facts and come with suggestions back to the management, not just show them the data, but also come with the end in mind, what you want to accomplish with this data.
Man, thank you very, very, very much. We're actually way out of our time frames, but there are some people asking more questions on the Slack channel, and we invite everyone not only to ask questions, but to provide feedback. It's very important for everyone to get feedback. Eran, I can't thank you enough. It was, as always, a great session, and again, man, looking forward to meeting you soon, early next year.
Looking forward, and thank you, guys. I will follow up with you on Slack.